Well, hello again, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. And I'm really sorry about all that noise, but I was just fiddling with my Philco AM pocket transistor radio. The latest thing. Did you know there are still wrestling talk show programs on the radio? I'm not saying podcasts, I'm saying radio. Good old fashioned radio. Just flick on the dial and you're there. Well, there's a few of them, and we've got probably one of the best ones on for you to learn about and enjoy on this show. So, hey, I'm going to go look for that show again. In the meantime, wait for the static. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. And welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name is Bob Smith, formerly with Pro Wrestling Illustrated and a host of wrestling magazines, and I have to make my announcements quick today. Why? Well, because of unforeseen circumstances, I'm recording this show at my homestead, not in my usual studio position. Oh no, can't get to it right now. So I am at home doing my best to not make you hear Bailey the cat or Bella the dog. Or the New York City ambulances that go by left, right, and sideways, or my neighbors upstairs, or my neighbors downstairs, or fire trucks, or you name it. So I'm going to get my announcements in and out of the way as quickly as I can here. First of all, I want to thank our guests today, Michael McCurdy and Glen Braget from Rasslin Memories Then Now out of Minnesota on Pioneer 90.1 FM, a wrestling radio show. Yes, they still exist. And we're going to talk more about that after the interview here. There are plenty of them to choose from, and I'm going to list a few of them for you. So enough of my yakking. Let's discover the world that still exists out there. I'm not kidding. Of wrestling radio with the guys from Rasslin Memories. And here they are right now. Well, it wasn't all that long ago when a couple of really nice fellows contacted me out of the blue, really, and said, would I like to be on their wrestling radio program? And I'm like, radio? How cool is that? When I went to college way back in the 1970s, yeah, guys, I'm that old, so, please. When I went to college back in the 70s, I wanted to be on radio. I was studying communications at SUNY Brockport in upstate New York. And I never did get to be on radio, even though I was on college radio. Life takes you in funny places. But in any event, obviously I'm still a radio fan. And in my mind's eye, podcasting is the, illegitimate stepchild to radio. So I feel like I finally got my opportunity all these decades later. But there are still some really great wrestling radio programs now. And one of the best is Rasslin Memories Then and Now. It's hosted by Glen Braget and Michael McCurdy, and it comes out of Minnesota. And we're going to talk all about that show with the host. Gentlemen, Glen and Michael, welcome to the Outdated Wrestling Hour.
Thanks for having us. I appreciate this. I love your program, by the way. Speaking of putting you over, giving you your flowers here before you talk with us, I found it a few months back. I went back and listened to all the back episodes. I love what you do. I love how you can throw in music into your program because you were and still are a musician. You talk about your music career. You also include a lot more talking to fans or historians alike, and you're not just talking to the same people that cycle through the pro wrestling podcast landscape. And I love a podcast that can drop in, a wrestling podcast that can drop in a Dominic Troiano reference and a Guess Who song lyric. One of the last episodes I listened to, I heard that Glamour Boy reference. You can't get that past me. I'm a tough goalie, man.
Man, you're a fan as big as I am. That's amazing. But no, I'm glad you pointed that out because you know what? I am worried about the same thing you just mentioned, repetition amongst wrestling podcasts. it seems like when a wrestler appears on one podcast or something's going on in the news, and like I was lucky enough to get Todd Gordon 2 months before his book came out, and the first meeting he did was me because we're old friends, and I knew it was coming out, so I contacted him first, and therefore we got a little traction out of that. People started to take notice of the show from that. But the thing is, I see the same wrestlers do this show, that show, that show, one after another all the time. And I'm thinking, if I put them on my show too at that same time period, they're going to say the same things over and over again, and nobody's going to listen to my show. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't know.
And to a degree, Bob, they also kind of seem to put themselves in the same sort of autopilot. After you get through like the third or fourth different cycle with these guys, it all just becomes so repetitious that you try hard to get a little piece of something different from them. But again, it's just a little too much exposure. I could see maybe a couple of interviews when someone puts a book out or there's some significant event. But again, if you're booking like the same person all the time, you need podcasts like yours to break that log jam up. And there's so much to talk about in the pro wrestling business, whether it's today's climate, love it or hate it, or even, diving back into the gold mine. And with you having your experience at Pro Wrestling Illustrated, also being involved in the beginnings of the ECW movement, I mean, you have so much to offer, and it's so good that it's more of an expansion upon what your history was in pro wrestling and being able to learn stuff. Heck, we talked about the Pro Wrestling Weekly newsletter, Pro Wrestling Illustrated Weekly newsletter when we were on the air. Things that we can still mine into that haven't been touched completely and turned into scorched earth.
Yeah, I hear you. One of the things that I feel free to do on my show is like the previous show to this one, I had Mike Leota's Wrestler Weekly, and we just went off on Portland wrestling for an hour and a half. I mean, who else is talking about that? Yeah. And again, the thing about our show, it's not like timestamp because of that. You can listen to our 4th episode or 10th episode or 14th episode, and it'll still be fresh because we're not talking about current events usually. And I find that to be very freeing. Like I can go off in any direction I want. I'm sure it's kind of that way for you guys too, because your show is nostalgia as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we definitely play that line of nostalgia, but also dipping into what's been going on the independent scene or what's going on in the pro wrestling landscape of today. And Mike has definitely been a great help since he came aboard here all these years ago. Man, I've been looking at our archives and who we've interviewed both before you came aboard, Mike, when I was with George Shire, and to this point now. And I've noticed and I've learned a lot more about the independents, more so than I have learned in a long time. And you're a very integral part to making that happen.
That was one of the things that I enjoyed about joining the show. Glenn and George, I mean, their show was great. I was a guest on that show back, I think, 2014. But, they did, with George, he was a historian just like I am. And he did the history stuff. When I joined in, I kind of talked to Glenn. I said, why don't we do a kind of a then and now thing where we can talk to, the legends? And we've done that. I mean, we've had Glenn and I have talked with, Tito Santana and Nikita Koloff, a bunch of those guys. But then we've also, mixed in the new, which I like. I like a little bit of a mix because I see wrestling, it's got to evolve. And while, yes, you are talking about the history, you want to let people know about these up and coming guys, the indie guys or the current people who also you find out they're just as much as versed in the wrestling history as anybody else because we're all fans. So you find out these indie guys, they want to talk wrestling history as much as anybody else, the indie guys. So, it's fun to have them on there. And I think Glenn and I kind of created a new kind of a spin or a little new twist to the show. And I've been with it for 5 years and we're going to keep going. In fact, we're still evolving the show. We're kind of adding a little more, maybe I refer to it as a cornet experience, flavor, where we kind of talk about what's going on current and offer our opinions. And, sometimes we go off the rails a little bit because, you know what, we get a little, animated.
But no
we got
nana
our
pudding.
opinions.
I will say the best podcasts and radio shows just go off. The free form, you never know what you're going to hear type of shows, I think are my favorites personally. And that's even in non-wrestling podcasts and radio shows. Just something that's, you never know what's going to happen. And just like wrestling, if you see something that you didn't anticipate, it's always more fun.
Oh, yeah, that call it in the ring dynamic that, again, can translate into so many different things, even in ways of communication. Absolutely. I mean, you could have a basic skeleton of what you would like to cover, but sometimes even in these interviews to the past, I've had this lined up, and I get into talking, and we go and completely cover one area a little bit more than the other, and we're going in this completely different direction. And we never quite get the chance to do that whole career retrospective thing. It's, for example, a few years back, George Shire and I interviewed Lanny Poffo. We didn't even get close to the WWF. We talked a lot about Lanny's, life growing up, being in that wrestling family with his father, Angelo, and of course his brother, Randy. And it was such fascinating stuff because he would talk about getting trained in, broken in, and then he would go talk about some of the places he kind of cut his teeth in, and also working for his father as well. All that stuff was so fascinating. And the only regret we really had was not being able to follow up with another interview to cover the other stuff in his career, the Leaping Lanny stuff, the stuff that I got to see when up here in northwestern Minnesota when I was watching the syndicated WWF show, Maple Leaf Wrestling, on a local station out of Winnipeg, because we lived close enough to where we would get the Winnipeg stuff. So I could watch AWA through Winnipeg. I could watch WWF. So yeah, having Lanny Poffo on, we didn't even get to that part two, but because the part one was so juicy and so entertaining, and just hearing this nostalgic take was really what just knocked me out. And having George kind of guiding in and learning under his learning tree as well. I mean, it was an education every week, and still is with Mike.
Yeah. When I first started doing podcast back in 2014, I used to do a podcast for IHWE here out of a wrestling group out of Texas. And I got to talk to Jim Ross at CAC. I think I'd been doing it for a couple months. And I asked him for some advice, about doing a podcast and how to do an interview. And one of the first things he told me was, have some questions, don't have like a list of paper on this question, this question, this question. Have a couple startup questions. And he said, but always listen to your guests and pick follow-up questions out of what they're saying. And if they say something that you're kind of interested in, follow up on that. Don't follow whatever your list of questions are. So I don't go in with a list of questions. I go in with maybe one to start with, maybe two. And then after that, if they mention this, I go, oh, that's interesting. And I'll bring that up as a follow-up. And that's the advice that Jim Ross gave me. And I think that's pretty good advice, actually.
That's excellent advice. And is always the big thing he said is always listen. Just don't let them ramble on and then go, well, what happened in 1981 when you such and such, and you change the flow of the conversation. That doesn't work.
The needle going off the record.
Well, Glenn, you were just talking about Lanny Poffo, and I remember him being one of the most fascinating real life sit downs I ever had in a high school locker room when they were doing an indie show when he was cut from the WWE at that point. And he's a fascinating guy because he goes back so far. People didn't realize what a veteran he was.
Yeah,
he worked for the Sheik, in big time wrestling. He worked all over the world, and his experiences long before he entered the WWF were amazing. I mean, what a talent he was.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was, again, more layers than what I had my initial reaction or seeing him the first time was working basically preliminaries, and to be able to discover more through tapes and things through the years and learning more about pro wrestling, always being a student of the game. No matter what level, for hosting, for in the business, working as a promoter or a promoter's assistant, it's a lot of us that are that student of the game mentality. And in recent years, we've all benefited from fellow students of the game. The audio visual hoarders I love, because if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have a lot of the stuff that you see from the territories on YouTube, the stuff that didn't make it to McMahon land when Vince was buying up libraries and all of that. You get to see so much more. I've watched and rewatched stuff from the AWA from like 83, 84 when I was a young kid when I first started watching it. And it's just blowing my mind how my memory recall is. Not the big major feuds, because that's easy. A lot of that stuff has been well documented, but just some of the little interviews or some of the matches, some of the, the preliminary guys that put over the big men. I call them the job guys, not the jobbers, because these guys, and like that really helped me out here, because who would have thought, like 20 or so, 30 or so yeyears later, I would have an episode where I was talking to Tom Rocky Stone, Chris Curtis and Mike Moran, a.k.a. Mike Richards. And it was all under the guise of a Job Guys Roundtable. And it was the most fascinating stuff because we were hearing AWA behind-the-scenes stuff about the fellow guys that they were traveling with. How many guys go to these tapings, the drives down to Kansas City working for Geigel? I mean, even and some, had more experience working down in Oklahoma, like Tom Stone. It was just so fascinating. It wasn't the main event guys telling the same main event stories. These were guys, these job guys were so funny, and hearing them kind of pull pranks on themselves too was just amazing. And just hearing about these characters that even back in the day, we still remember them because to a degree, they had their own larger than life status too, having all that exposure on the television and working those house shows.
You brought up a point there about how valuable the people who are posting all this stuff on YouTube and Facebook and other areas, they're just so valuable because I had Joyce Paustian on the show a few months ago, and her book was fantastic, her AWA photo book. And she recalled that one of the things that scared her when she was a kid was a match with on television where the Crusher busted open Mad Dog for Sean so bad that it was a literal artery cut.
Yeah, and that was nasty.
That is still floating around. So when she said it, I remembered Roger Kent's call, like, somebody put some pressure on that. He's got an artery cut. Please get in the ring. Stop this. And I remembered it as vividly as she does, thanks to the people who post these things for free on YouTube. Yeah, I mean, how incredible is it? I mean, you feel like you have a better breadth of knowledge thanks to people like you guys for your show, the people who post on YouTube. It's keeping that old school spirit alive, and that is so important.
It's funny you mentioned Joyce's memory there. One of my earliest memories watching wrestling, I grew up in California, Northern California, and I had family in Oregon. So we would travel up, during the holidays to visit, Thanksgiving, stuff like that. And my brother was watching Portland wrestling. I think I was probably 10, 11. I don't know how old. But he was watching it, and there was a masked guy. I want to say Top Gun. I can't remember. But I remember he was bleeding, so the mask was, soaked in the blood and all that. And my brother, he's just got a blah, blah, blah. Like, he was just kind of laughing about it. And I'm like, 10 years old, freaking out, thinking, oh, my God, this guy's, like, covered in blood. I still remember it. I can't remember who it was, but I still remember seeing the soaked mask in blood going, oh, God, he's, that guy's bleeding. Oh, my God, somebody's got to help him. Because I was a kid. Now I look back at it and go, oh, okay. All right, I understand a little bit more about it, but I always remember that.
And I bet you remember that so vividly, the same way I remember Fred Blassie in 1972, on television, making his WWF return in the ring against Big Jim Lancaster. I remember every nuance of this. And he bites the guy open, and he's gushing blood out of his forehead. And I think it was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. I was only like 11 or maybe 12, maybe 10. And I had the same feelings you do. Once you see that for the first time, it freaks you out. But for the same reason, it makes you want to come back the next week and see the next week's show. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When I got back home, we went back home, that's when I found, like I said, I lived in a small town, but we got WWF mainly. But I found it and I started watching it. It was probably about that time watching that Portland show that I was like, well, this is interesting. I want to watch this. And then I started seeing the WWF. So I had, Hogan and, the Junkyard Dog and all this. That's what I grew up on. But yeah, no, I always remember the blood-soaked mask. I was sitting on the living room floor. My brother was in his chair. My father was sitting on the couch. My mother was in the kitchen with my sister-in-law. And I'm just sitting on the living room floor watching this TV going, this guy's bleeding to death. And my brother just thinks it's funny.
Wow. Glenn, do you have a moment like that? You were watching wrestling and you just went, oh my gosh, what am I, my term for it is, what am I looking at? Did you ever have a moment like that?
Oh man, I was like the moth to the light with pro wrestling when I had older brothers and sisters. I had older cousins. I felt like I was basically like 5-10 years older than what I really was. So I got exposed to the AWA, and it was on Winnipeg television. Like I mentioned before, it was so easy to access because of where I lived. I grew up in Lake Bronson, Minnesota, which is about maybe 30 miles from the Canadian border, the Manitoba border. So a lot of my my influences was from Canada, So I watched this show, and man, some Sundays we'd go visit my grandpa and grandma who lived in nearby Walhalla, North Dakota, even closer to Manitoba. And I would watch AWA wrestling. It'd be on Saturday night, and then it would be on Sunday morning with the replay. And I remember this as clear as day, watching Jerry Blackwell turned babyface. It was a big battle royal where he turned on or Sheik Adnan. He had it stacked up. He had Abby. He had like Bruiser or King Kong Brody at the time, or what they referred to him as, of course, because of the gentleman's agreement. You don't want to call him Bruiser. Yeah. But when Jerry Blackwell turned on the Sheik and the beating that they gave Jerry and the vision of Jerry laying in that, the proverbial crimson mask, but seeing that hot crowd, it was amazing. Jerry Blackwell, this guy who was affiliated with Adnan El-Casey, who is just the epitome of heeldom, is this baby face, but having him laid out for so many minutes before they took him back, and the post interview with Ken Resnick of Jerry barely coming to and coughing and talking, could barely register anything. That to me was a memory. Bruiser Brody taking out the high flyers at a TV taping. That was another one that I can remember well. And another one I could remember too was Kenny J winning over Sergeant Jacques Goulet. I'm like, after all of this stuff, I'm like, I am sold. I loved it all. When I was a kid, I was watching it. I must have been about 5-6 years old. Like I said, older brothers and sisters, you couldn't help be in the room sometimes, even though it was the best way to stop their quiet or their loud nagging brother, put him in front of the TV. And all these years later, I can still remember this stuff, and going to my grandparents and watching with my grandpa as well, which is also just an extra nice, warm type of moment when you think about people who are not with us anymore.
Yeah, same here. And I'll tell you what, it's so true. From being a kid, those kid memories, for some reason, stick in your head like glue, that you never lose them. And it kind of informs everything you watch in the years that go by. Yes. It's like, it's magical. It has a hold on you that never lets go. Like, I watch the current stuff and I'm not all that enamored with it. I thought SmackDown the other night was horrifically bad, but I still watch because what's that?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, that was the finish was just ridiculous. But anyway, it still informs you and gives you a knowledge base that will last the rest of your fandom, if that makes any sense. At least it's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, it definitely shapes it. And, I do watch AEW, and what I like about it, though, is because I've been following this guy because I used to, again, this Winnipeg connection. I would watch Tony Condello's Westport Wrestling Alliance around the late 80s, early 90s. He was putting up weekly television of his promotion. And through him, I got to see in the early days guys like Chris Jericho and Lance Storm, and even Adam Copeland came in the 90s to work some shows. But Don Callis was the top man on the squad. And a lot of people forget now because he is this on-air manager personality and he plays that role so well. We need a good villain like Don to kind of wake people up. But Don Callis was actually a fantastic in-ring wrestler. There's stuff you can watch from the West 4. There's a lot of the West 4 shows that are up online. And you can watch him working with Rick Martel. You can see him working with Jim Brunzell. There are some great matches just with those two, for example, and with some of the guys that he worked with, like a young Jericho and Storm. There's a lot of great wrestling that came out of that. Of course, there's a lot of chaff that goes with that weed. But for the most part, it was Destination TV on Sundays at 5 o'clock to watch Condello's program. Although after a while, they were kind of pulling in a Savoldi, when they would show that Vic Steamboat Tony Atlas title match. WFWA did that a few times. But the thing was, about the time of the mid-90s, they would constantly show these matches from Japan. So I would be watching. I've seen the Chris Jericho Pegasus Kid match. I could memorize that match after a while because Condello would be throwing that in each week because they were suffering from lack of content. But those are just the things. Seeing Don Callis now with the bald head, I can remember him with the long flowing hair, and he was doing the Ric Flair / Randy Savage angle. So that's kind of fun, and that kind of connects me from today to the past with some of the product.
Right. There's always that lineage that somehow seeps through even to the newest stuff. Somehow, it just works that way. So
I want to talk about something. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm lucky about something. Glenn and I talk about this. I've got a son. He's 12 and he watches wrestling with me. So I get that opportunity to watch like a WWE event, like a premium live event. And for example, Civil War with where it was Jimmy and Jay versus Roman and Sikoa. My son was losing his mind. He would yell, he would scream, "Dad, that's not fair. What are they doing?" And he just loses it. He's giving them every reaction they want. So for me, I get to sit and watch wrestling, yes, but then I get to watch him. And I get to kind of remember when I was his age and I was like, oh my God, they did that to Hogan or they did that to the Junkyard Dog. And I get to watch it again. So I get to see my son react the way I did. And then I get to see him react the way, the wrestlers want them to. So for me, I get like a twofold type of thing where I'm watching the show, but I'm also getting to watch his reactions. And sometimes he's more entertaining than, what I'm watching on the TV. But it's fun to see it through his eyes. I got to take him to the second night of WrestleMania when it was here in Dallas. And when he first saw the screen, the stage set up, just to see the look in his face, like, whoa, that for me was like, okay, wow, proud dad moment here, because he was just fascinated by just the spectacle of WrestleMania. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of fun for me to get to watch it through him as well.
It really is true. Say what you want about WWE, but nobody puts on a spectacle like they do in any other form of entertainment. It's like their huge, stadium shows are incredible in terms of the audio visual component and the overall look and feel of it. There's nothing else like it anywhere. I mean, I think their shows are more visually appealing than like even the Super Bowl, the World Series. It's just, they do everything they can in terms of modern technology mixed with wrestling.
Well, exactly. And like I said, for me to see my son watching it is fun. He looks at some of the older stuff that I watched and doesn't get quite as interested in it. But, Dad will watch a, match from the 1950s Chicago Wrestling Club for 45 minutes where they're doing a headlock for 20 minutes. But that's fascinating to me. So.
Yeah, I know it's fascinating to me too. And one of the things that I like to watch in the old tapes, like you're watching, is always the ring announcers with their ill-fitting tuxedos. Why would they never find a tuxedo that could fit a ring announcer from 1950 to about 1977? They all were these old guys with poorly fitting tuxedos, right? I mean, it's like it must have been a rule somewhere in wrestling.
It was a style.
You can't upstage the talent. You're just the announcer, kid. Get into those trousers over there, that blazer. It looks like it. It's like 2 sizes too small. Work with me here.
Well, what's really true in a lot of states, a lot of the wrestling people who work, at least in New York State, were sanctioned by the New York State Athletic Commission, and the same people who work wrestling had previously worked boxing. So a lot of them just kind of moved over into wrestling because it was under the same umbrella in terms of the State Athletic Commission. And I don't know how that worked in other states, but I think that's part of the reason here. So let's get back to your show. 10 years or so, Glenn?
Oh, yeah. Let me get back to it. Our first episode with George Shire and myself was aired on June 30th, 2012. And we had a triple stack lineup. We actually went like 90 minutes to 2 hours with the show right away and then whittled it down to 60. What I had on there was a promoter down in the Twin Cities who worked with Steel Domain Wrestling by the name of Ed Hellier. Greg Klein, who has his own podcast these days, which I listen to from time to time because I love when he gets into the Houston wrestling. Greg Klein, he had written that book, of course, about Junkyard Dog that was, about 2012. It was a great book. I really enjoyed Greg's work on that. And we had a man who was the NWA champion who had a best of 7 series with Colt Cabana at that time. And now you see him on WWE TV, Scrap Iron Adam Pearce. And that was the first episode. And after that, everything just kind of kept going. I'm looking back at the list of people we've chatted with just in that first season, and it's a real murderer's row here of talent. I have at separate times. I had the high flyers, Jim Brunzell and Greg Gagne. I had Ken Resnick, Tully Blanchard, Les Thatcher, Billy Robinson, Jerry Jarrett, Arda O'Cal, Dick Beyer, for God's sake, Dr. X Destroyer, Jim Duggan, Butcher Vachon and James Beard, Fred Ottman, and Greg Oliver from Slam Sports. And even, we're going to feed to your East Coast independent flavor here, DC Drake. It was around that time when they said there were some erroneous reports that were saying that DC Drake had passed away, and he had to come out and talk to Slam Sports, and there are various things that say, hey, I'm still here. I'm still here. So he was so open to chat about that. He's like, I got to explain my existence to every part of the country.
Wow. DC Drake, the last scary heel.
Absolutely.
That's the way I feel about DC. I mean, he was the first guy as a full-grown adult. I'm watching going, what am I looking at? That's the thing that hooks you in. Like, he's foaming at the mouth. He's growling. He looked insane. And you know what? At the point when he was working the indies, along with people like Mick Foley and stuff like that, I think that DC was every bit the daredevil that Mick was. when you went and saw him. And I saw him take a fall off a balcony once, and long before everybody else was doing it.
Mhm.
He was kind of hanging from a balcony in an arena, and he finally let go and dropped probably about 18 feet. So he was fearless in the ring.
That, and if you look deep, you can find, again, thanks to the good people out there in YouTube land, you could find some of that stuff as well. And that leading us a precursor to some of the big Goodhart shows, and then to ECW. So that's where a lot of these seeds were planted, was within that DC Drake era, with him and Larry Winters and all of that.
Right. Those guys were hungry young guys who wanted to make a name for themselves. And, I got to hang out with them, thankfully. And it was quite a period. You're right. That really was kind of like the seeds of hardcore.
Yeah, he could be the Johnny Appleseed of hardcore wrestling in Philadelphia and beyond. I don't know if he'll, but knowing him, he's got a good sense of humor. He'd probably take that in stride.
I think he would too.
Yeah,
I should send you some links, Bob. You refer to DC Drake as like one of the last like scary heels. There's a guy, he's a friend of mine. I've known him for about probably 10, 15 years now. Wrestles Pacific Northwest. We also wrestled Canada and all that. Glenn and I had him on the show. But he does a gimmick where he's the human horror show, Drexel. And he does a lot of the hardcore and all that. And I booked him on shows when I was running a couple in California. And there was one where he scared the bejesus out of this kid to where the father actually came back into our dressing area and was demanding that he apologize for scaring his son. Because his son was just in tears from this wrestler that just walked by and spooked him. But you talk about DC Drake and all that, and I hype Drexel anytime I get a chance because I think his work is great, and he can go from being the bad guy to, but when he does the human horror show, man, he'll go to the extreme, and people just freak when they see him coming. I mean, it's great. It's
a skill, Not everybody can do that. It's something. It's the mindset of the person underneath whatever gimmick he's got on. It can't just be a mask or Everybody loved Bray Wyatt when he put his Fiend mask on, but after 3 weeks, you've seen it. It takes more than that to be legitimately scary, I think.
Oh, definitely. But like I said, I'll send you a couple links. I'll find some of his better matches, excuse me, and I'll send them to you. You can get a chance to kind of take a look at them. I think you might like it.
You're right. This is a first for me. I appreciate that because I've never seen him in action, so that'll be great. So as your show progressed, I mean, that's a long time. A decade's a long time, guys. And in any form of entertainment, that's a sign of success when you've been around for 10 years.
Oh, absolutely.
How hard is it staying on the air in terms of, do you have to worry about radio ratings? And not so much with podcasting because it's pretty much up to podcast companies whether they want to stay on the air or not. But radio has always been very ratings driven. So how hard is it to maintain?
Well, here's the beauty of this, Bob. I work up here at KSRQ Radio, Pioneer 90.1, of which you can listen to at www.radionorthland.org. And for 50 years now, we have been, and for a good 20 of those 50, we have been an independent community public radio station. We are part of a band of other independent public stations in Minnesota. We're called the Ampers Group. We are not associated with Minnesota Public Radio, which is the big entity that kind of runs things down there in St. Paul. Now, what we've done through the years here, this was originally an outlet for broadcasting. It was a broadcasting school, part of the community college where you could learn radio and basic stuff with television back in the day. And this was a long-running program, and it started as a low-watt radio station. And then by 1990, they ended up getting hooked up at our local Fox affiliate tower just out of town here. And now we are a 24,000-watt station, and we have been for over 30-some years now. And as far as ratings go, now it's basically we have an open door policy. We're very open. We do have syndicated shows and all of that, but we're a melting pot of different things that come from the communities in our area. We open the door for formats and for music styles. If you have a program, the key is, yeah, you can come in with any sort of idea or pitch or format. It's if you have the time and the resources to follow through and come in or do it at home now with home recording. Mm-hmm. If you have a program, if you have a vision and you keep it clean, you can end up on here, and we monitor and keep it on, and we build audiences with a lot of these talents that have come from our community. which is kind of a crazy thing. We go anywhere from polka to blues to jazz to metal. I mean, I've hosted shows that cater more towards the classic rock, the deeper classic rock. I've done Minnesota history stuff on the Minnesota music. I've also done local history stuff. I've interviewed authors. I've interviewed other people, classic rock stars. I mean, to be able to have this resource and to be here as long as I have been here first as a volunteer, and then I moved into getting paid. I just celebrated 15 years here at the station. But I've been part of the station through my schooling for well over 20 plus years. And I have definitely been an advocate of these community stations, because nowadays you turn on the radios and you get your iHearts and your whatever, these big conglomerates running it and just basically leaving it into some sort of genericide where you can hear any of the same DJ voice in many different markets. There's no originality. All it is left is them trying to collect money from ads revenue and also try to parlay some of the stuff they do online. It's a dead vessel, and it's unfortunate because there's still some talented people on these airwaves, but they're just not getting those openings like they used to. And having, yes, a community station, a lot of people think about, the quirkiness of it, but I think it's just such an available opportunity. And they've had this door open for me to develop so many different things, not only Rasslin Memories, that I've been so eternally grateful for. And if it all ended tomorrow, I'd just be grateful for what I had today.
I love radio. I love radio. I grew up listening to the radio, the transistor under the pillow type of guy, either for sports or talk or especially music, because back in my day, right? Back in my day, there would be FM rock and roll programs, and you never knew what you were going to hear, and you were enticed by the personality on the air.
Yes.
He became like a friend. The same with WABC AM here in New York City. Cousin Brucey and all those other legendary names that worked there. You tuned in, and they became your pals. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what radio misses now, the immediacy of the connection between the people who are talking and the people who are listening. I think that's real important in radio. And you're right. I think corporate radio has killed off a lot of that.
Oh, I know. And that's why I always make a pledge to, whether I'm doing a music show or whatever, I like to try to have something that's an alternative. It doesn't have to be something over the top. It's just mild tweaks and stuff. You could start with something basic and work your way. It just seems like radio just ain't doing it, man. Then they have so much at hand. They have there's just so many watts of power being wasted every night on the airwaves. And when I grew up listening to like FM, but I had some AM love too. And I miss the vibes of checking out an AM, just the AM dial deep into the night, just to hear what sort of things bounce off of your receiver, Those are things that a lot of the kids today will never be able to figure out, because it was just something of the time, for the time, left a great legacy. They can read about it in the book, but I don't think they could get that full feel like they used to.
That's another great memory for me as a kid with radio. You're talking AM. I remember Sunday nights, there was an AM station. It was scratchy, but if I tuned it in just right and got that signature, I could pick up the Dr. Demento show on this local AM radio station. And I remember it's like, every Sunday night I would tune in Dr. Demento. I didn't care if it was, as long as I could hear Dr. Demento. That was my thing, so, I mean, sounds like all of us growing up, we were literally the, rock and roll radio song by the Ramones. You had the little radio under your bed and, all the radio music coming out. I'm with you guys. I loved radio. I loved listening to stations, and the guys I grew up with, and sadly, a lot of the local DJs from my hometown have passed on now. And it's kind of sad because that's just a piece of my childhood.
Around 1970, 71, right? Mm-hmm. I'm in my shower in Catskill, New York, where I grew up, in Greene County in upstate New York. And I'm fiddling around with my transistor, which is in my pocket all the time. And I was taking a shower one evening. I don't know why I was taking a shower at night, but I was. And I find this station and I hear a voice, and I went, "That's our wrestling announcer, Jack Reynolds." Because I used to watch the old NWF. That's Jack Reynolds. And his show, he'd play some music. He'd take a call from some lady, and they would talk for 10 minutes. And then there would be some news, and then they'd play another record, and then somebody else would call. It was the most freeform thing I ever seen. And he was a celebrity in Cleveland, not so much for his wrestling work, but because he was a radio guy. And I didn't know this. And I discovered just from flipping my dial one day, those the big wattage stations you could pick up that the wind was blowing just right. One of those deals.
Uh-huh.
What memories those were, man. And that's why I love radio. You never really knew what you were going to hear.
And the thing, Bob, nowadays, and I've been doing this for the last couple of years, I've been going on YouTube and listening to old air checks. There's a bunch of air checks from all over the country. These various sites have been putting out. Some are in shorter form, chewable. Others, they go free form, non-scope. So you get to hear all the music, the commercial spots, the weather, the news updates. You can just sit and take a 4-hour, there's one file. You can take a 4-hour block of your life and go back to Detroit, 1972. And it's just so cool because you're actually listening to these stories that are developing, the news developing in the moment, having these like little time capsules instead of just getting the revision nowadays. It's so much fun because you get to hear the way radio news was done too, and just the high level of professionalism. There wasn't just things that were causing division. It was the straight up news, and it was the information you need. I was listening to a Buffalo snowstorm from the 70s, and they're going to their news updates and how they reacted, and just proving how vital of service that was through those emergency times, whether it's a blackout in New York in the late 70s or, like I said, a snowstorm in Buffalo, New York, just using New York for an example. But that is some really cool stuff. And I love, again, keep finding these air checks. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, you know what? AM radio is still vital. Yeah. About 14 years ago, I'm driving in New Hyde Park, New York, in Long Island, and the sky is the color of split pea soup green. I never saw a green sky before. We had a hurricane or something like that coming, and I just happened to be tuned to 880 WCBS News Radio New York, and they said, if you're in the New Hyde Park area of New York, you'd be best served to pull off the road. I went, oh my God. I mean, I swear to God, this happened. So I pulled off, and this hellacious storm came and went. It only lasted about 25 minutes, but I had never seen a green sky in my life. AM radio is still so vital. And what bothers me about the way it's programmed in a lot of areas these days is you don't get enough local. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
You'll hear an AM station, but it'll be the same. I'm just pulling names out of my head. Rush Limbaugh, followed by this talk show, followed by that talk show. It's the same thing you hear anywhere. But there's no local flavor to the thing, and not enough news. I think local news is best served on radio. I really do.
And we're pretty spoiled up here. I mean, yes, we don't have the big city amenities, but we have our local radio stations. I mean, like I have one in town here at Thief River Falls, which is an AM FM outlet, but they're so very good about keeping it local. Having this stuff. I mean, sure, again, it's another example. They have syndicated shows and stuff, but during their days and afternoons, you don't hear the Rush Limbaughs or anything from either the conservative or liberal spectrum. You just hear these local people kind of talking off the cuff. Yeah, they can maybe lean from one issue to the other, lean into something, but again, it's a local slice of something. It's something that keeps, I guess, the radio station as a member of the community that has such an important bit of clout. I mean, up here, they still listen to the basketball, the sporting events for the high schools and stuff. That is some big money for these advertisers, but it's something that, again, it just gets lost in the sauce when you get it and you move up into these bigger markets and all of that. It just loses identity. And I'm very grateful to have the local AMs with that identity of a local run station.
We have a local station here, that I listen to every morning when I'm getting kids ready to go. It's a country music station. And the studio is literally like 30 minutes from where I live. And they're local and they do their morning show. And the main DJ, he's a wrestling fan. So he'll throw in like what he saw on like SmackDown or something too. So it's kind of fun because, it's all local. But then he throws in like I was watching SmackDown Friday night and blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of fun to listen to that. So, but yeah, it's like 30 minutes from my place. It's just a local station all in.
But it's part of your life now, isn't it? You always tune in, don't you?
Oh yeah, every morning. It's on every radio in my house and the radio out in the car, and yeah, it's just the one we listen to. It's the old like 80s, 90s country music station, not the current stuff. So we have fun with it.
But that must help you, even your wrestling show, because I get this the feeling from looking over your programs on where you broadcast. It's very. I don't want to say it provincially, but it's very community oriented. I mean, you can tell there's a local flavor to everything you guys do on that network.
Oh, 100%. And that's, again, that gives us true identity. You got to have something that separates you from another station. You don't want to be clumped up into the same stations that don't do anything but just basically be a glorified Pandora. a glorified music app. We do things for the reason of we want to keep this so much attached to the human element. Automation kind of came in and kind of just ran. I mean, yes, the convenience, I call it the inconvenience of convenience. All these things that we have been given, but we're a push button world, but I don't know. In the end, we're going to still have to fall back on some manual leanings and get back to some more human interactions. I don't want to sit and argue with somebody about a pro wrestling matter or whatever matter, because I know I'm not going to change their mind and it would just be fruitless. I'd rather just be chatting with these people, because sometimes face value does a little bit more than just being a warrior of the keyboard. I like interaction. I like getting to talk to people. I like what's real. You could type till the cows come home until you get carpal tunnel, but it don't mean nothing. It don't mean nothing. It's just, you're just a little ripple in the social media river, man.
I think one of the great things about KSRQ, and once I started doing the show with Glenn, I started listening to the station more often, is that, I'm out here in Texas, so obviously I can't get the local, I can't tune in on the radio, but you got the tune in radio app. And you type in Pioneer 90.1, and you're getting the same live broadcast that they're getting in Thief River Falls and wherever the market is. So when I'm promoting, trying to invite a guest on, they're like, okay, well, where's the station at? What's the coverage? I was like, well, it's here. I said, but we're available on TuneIn. So basically, you've got a worldwide audience. You can you could be all over the world and listen to Pioneer 90.1 at your time frame and listen to our show. And
I'm huge in Kazakhstan, man. I'm huge in Kazakhstan.
That gets a lot of people. They go, oh, okay, I'll come on. And I've gotten a few people that want to come on and promote their show or their book, because they realize, oh, they can tell the people that, in their area in Oregon or, Washington or wherever, oh, hey, it's going to be on at this time on Sunday. Okay. And then they can just go to the TuneIn app and listen to it.
And the thing too is, Mike, and the thing too is, when we get interviews with authors and stuff, and I do this in my other programs where I've interviewed authors for music books and the like, I read the damn book. A lot of people just get there and they hit those bullet points. Again, that's another thing about having somebody taking a circuit for an interview. You're always hitting those same points. I'm like, I dig into a book to find something that's a little more off the beaten path that can engage a guest, whether it's somebody writing their memoir or they're, doing a historical document. There's more to it if you actually read the damn book. I'm a book promoter now.
Well, Joyce Paustian's book, I was not going to have her on the show. I said, Joyce, if I'm going to have you on the show, I need to buy your book.
Yes.
I didn't want her to give it to me because she's trying to, make money on the books. She's selling it independently, completely. You have to write to her. So she sends me the book, and I read the book before I talked about the book, because you can't, 75% photos. What was I going to do if I didn't have a book in front of me? It makes no sense. So you're right. You have to have a little bit of knowledge about what you're talking about before you talk about it.
For sure. You don't want to just look like a jackass at the end if you ask the wrong question, and because then they can see right through you. Once they see the blood in the water, then you're basically just treading that water, trying to get away from the shark and wrap up that interview. There was times where I when I was learning my interview skills, and I'm still a work in progress, by God, it never ends. I've interviewed a bunch of musicians, like I was interviewing Ian McClogan from The Faces. Small Faces. I interviewed Eric Burden of the Animals, Roger McGuinn. I've had one of the few rare interviews with Garth Hudson of the band. I still need to find that file to put online. But one of the interviews that was just so awkward was with Mark Volman of the Turtles. It was for a show that was playing a casino. And now I understand what's going on with this, because as soon as I asked the first question, he went right in and just rattled off his biography about the band, just leading shutting all the doors to potential gateway questions. And he just went off, and then we talked about the state of the music business for like 20 minutes or so. And it was just like, whoa. I had another incident like that with a very exhausted Al Cooper. He had been up all night because he was dealing with studio problems, and he was trying to get anything, blood from a stone, just did not want to engage. But then, when I stepped away from the interview and all of that and did the editing, I'm like, I realized I felt what they were, I had empathy for them because they were going through their own sort of stuff. But at the same time, it was like, I was just, please get this interview over. How many more questions should I ask? These guys are giving me nothing, but it didn't deter me. It was a learning experience, and I still love those guys today, nonetheless.
Well, I got a question for both of you, okay, that maybe be the first time anybody ever asked you this, and I hope it is. All right, you ready? When I left college, I wanted to be on radio. That was my goal. I had a friend who had no training whatsoever, but was desperate to get on radio, and eventually did. Today, he's a program director and has been with the same station for probably close to 40 years. And I find that very heartening. Has radio been worth it for both of you? Are you making a living? Are you happy? Is it everything you hoped it would be? Okay. Either one of you can start that one.
I'll get rolling on this one, Bob. Thank you. I've been doing this in a capacity. I've been basically doing it at part-time, but the thing is, I would have loved to have hit a major market, but at the same time, dollars didn't make sense. I had other things going on in my life. I took the route of, I'm a laborer. Again, I go back to that manual thing, being able to understand what you can do with your hands. So I was able, and through just happenstance and good luck, to find, having KSRQ here and being able to get hired on. Everything else that I went through, doing volunteer work, I did work professionally at a country radio station, by the way. And that was like getting your teeth pulled every day with that. It was local, but I just couldn't feel it, and I didn't want to waste their time. But when I found KSRQ in 2014 again, this is kind of where I really fell in love with radio, where I was doing it for free. People say, I'll do it for nothing. I did. A few years later, they hired me on as a part-time. I worked a couple of years full-time when the money was here with grant money, and I've still to some capacity. I put in, aside from my other job, I put in extra, I do a 40-hour week, sometimes a 45-hour week at my other job, and I put in another 20 here. It's a lot of work. But I wouldn't trade it for anything because this has given me so much license and to meet so many people. I would never have thought I'd be talking to authors. Hey, recently I did an interview with May Pang to talk about the documentary about her and John Lennon's Lost Weekend. I got to talk to professional wrestler Nick Bockwinkel, for God's sake, a few years ago before Nick's, memory and all that kind of took a turn. I got to talk to these people from all different facets. I am lucky, and I thank the business and I thank the chance to have an opportunity to have this. So even again, I could go back to not getting paid for this, even on a part-time. I could go do this for free again. Why? Because I love it. There's somebody out there that enjoys it, and that's enough for me.
Okay, Michael, you're up.
Mine's kind of interesting. Like we told you in the interview when you were on our show, early 90s, I got into the writing because I found out through, your guys' magazines that, I could write about wrestling, and I loved doing that. And then when the internet became the thing, at the time, I found, history sites and websites where I could. So I got into being a historian, and I loved writing about it. And I would write, if people could ask me, oh, you want to write for a newsletter? Sure, I'll write for a newsletter. And I would write a piece. I'd write an article. That's what I did. Occasionally, I might go on someone's internet show to talk about something, but I didn't do radio. And then in 2014, a friend of mine posted up on his Facebook page, hey, I'm looking for someone to host a podcast for ISWE Radio. Hit me up if you're interested. And I just said, well, I've never done an interview show. I've never done a radio before, but yeah, sure, I'll give it a try. And he called me 2 days later and said, hey, we're going live on Wednesday. Okay. I had no experience. I had no idea how to do an interview, no intros, no nothing. I'd never done podcast or radio, anything except for maybe call in and answer a couple questions. And then 3 weeks after that show started, I was on the air interviewing Kevin Von Erich. I mean, I jumped right into the fire. And I stumbled, I got my advice from Jim Ross, in that time. In earlier shows, I interviewed Jim Cornette, Chaz Taylor, Ivan Koloff. These are the guys that I got to interview before, during that year, Molly Holly, Diana Hart, Bruce Hart, who we've interviewed a couple times more on Rasslin Memories. But I didn't have any radio or podcast experience. And then I ended that show. And then in 2018, funny coincidence, Glenn posted up, George Shire is stepping down. I'm looking for a new co-host for Rasslin Memories. He was looking at possibly a revolving door of co-hosts, like a different one every week, a few, 2 or 3 guys. And I messaged him and I said, hey, I'd be interested. And then 2 weeks later, I'm on the air talking with, Al Burke with my scratchy ass voice because my voice was shot and the weather had allergies that killed it, which is why now I got the name the Grizzled Vet, because Al Burke said I sounded like one of the grizzled old vets in the locker room, drinking whiskey and smoking cigars. And then a week later, Glenn's like, "Oh, and my co-host, the Grizzled Vet," and I went, "Okay." So over the 5 years that I've been doing the show with Glenn now I do another live stream called Offshoots TV, which is just me and my buddies just talking wrestling, cracking jokes for, a good hour. But I've gotten into it and I love it. And I've had a chance to interview so many people. Like Glenn said, I got to interview Nikita Koloff. I got to have Nikita Koloff talk to me with the Russian accent. Do you want me to? And I'm just like a kid going, it's Nikita Koloff. Tito Santana, same thing. I hear his voice. I'm like, oh. And one of my favorite interviews I've gotten to do, I got to interview Lance Von Erich when his autobiography came out. So I got to talk with him. And for me, being such a world-class fan, that's the focus of my history work. I loved it. 45 minutes of Lance Von Erich, and I still consider that probably one of my greatest accomplishments. But I haven't been doing radio that long. But now I'm getting into looking into how podcasts do content creation, how they do marketing. So maybe I can, be a little mini Conrad Thompson or something and get a little something going and maybe get some money going. I mean, Glenn and I have talked about, doing this like a podcast, over to the Spotify where maybe we can start, making some money. Because right now, I work 40 hours at a grocery store, but I love doing this more. I made time to do this interview because I love talking about wrestling. I love doing the interviews, even if it's just me and Glenn talking for 20 minutes about what we watched on SmackDown. I love it. And I've only been doing it now for basically 9 years.
Yeah. And you know what the beauty part about all this is? I don't know if you guys feel the same way I do. Life is short. Follow your dream, no matter how small or big it is. If you enjoy it, do it. Be damned for the money. I think Pete Townsend once said, do music and be damned for the money. Don't look at the money as your main goal. Look at the experience as your main goal.
Life's for tasting and not for wasting, my friend. I've been living by that credo for a long time. And that's why I go to the concerts when they're there in the area. You go to the shows. You go see people. You go live life because, man, I'll stare at the wall when I'm 80 or 90 or whatever. For now, I'm enjoying while I can when I can.
I actually enjoy staring at the wall, but that's another.
Well, that's every once in a while when I'm out of resources. That's like dead of winter in Minnesota when it's 45 below.
No, but
wind
that's
chill.
how I decompress because I have 3 jobs. Between my media job, this job, and something else I'm up to, I'm exhausted sometimes. So sometimes the only thing I can do is look up at the ceiling and go, phew. Clear that head for a few minutes.
This is my safe spot right now. I can just decompress and then I can reset everything and get myself. I understand with the multi jobs, man. There's always so many plates you can spin, right?
And at my age, I have never been this busy. I don't understand what I did to get this lucky at this point in my life. I just don't, because I had a long dormant period, and lately I'm like, the phone's always ringing. It's amazing. I don't know what happened, but I'm thankful that it did, And I'm also thankful for both of you for allowing me on your great wrestling show. I've listened to a few episodes, and there's nobody else like you out there. I want everybody who's listening, give them the Cook's Tour one more time before we sign off about where they can find you.
Yes, you can check us out on a weekly. You can listen to us live and in the moment at Radio Northland. NORTHLAND.org. We're a public station. We're also streaming on TuneIn. You can go there anywhere. Take it with your, on your smartphone. Yeah, you can take me and listen. And you can also listen on SoundCloud. There's a Rasslin Memories archives on there. And brother, that's where the whole kit and caboodle are on there. That's where you could find that Radio Northland page. You can find my interviews with authors, musicians, and all of that. One day I'll get the courage to put up that Al Cooper interview. But anyway, I that's where I go. It's a labor of love. It keeps me reading. It keeps me plugged in and listening to stuff. It feeds to every little bit of my historian nature, man. And I love it. RadioNorthland.org. Tune in. SoundCloud page, Radio Northland. You won't be disappointed. And if you are, I sincerely apologize.
I'd like to throw in real quick, if I can, Bob. If anybody's interested, like I've mentioned a couple times before, Thursday nights at 9:00, I do a live stream show on Facebook called Offshoots TV. Like I said, it's me and my buddies, and we're just talking, whatever the current wrestling headlines are. We're making jokes, we're cracking jokes. It's a little bit more lighthearted than, a basic interview. We don't do a lot of interviews. But if people want to find that show, Yeah. Just search for Offshoots TV on Facebook every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central.
I want everybody who listens to this show to find Rasslin Memories Then and Now. It's legitimately a very, very good show. And if you like old school wrestling and you like this show, I think you'll love that show. Glenn and Michael, thanks for being here. And thanks for allowing me on your show. I got the message from you on Facebook completely out of the blue, and I'm very honored that you let me on your show, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate
anytime,
it.
man.
Hey, who knows? Maybe we'll get we'll be back on this old podcast again, and we could talk about other pro wrestling facets, man. We've only merely touched the surface on
Yes,
this.
we have. You know what? I will say this, like I say to all my favorite guests, you both have an open invite to come back anytime you want. Seriously, because I think, hey, radio pros, they don't grow on trees, you know.
No. There's a lot of dead trees these days in this business.
That's for sure. It's Glen Braget and Michael McCurdy, guys. Thanks again.
Thank you, Bob.
Anytime, my friend.
How great are those guys? Make sure you take a listen to Rasslin Memories as soon as you can. And there are other radio/podcast shows, and with the emphasis on radio, I'd like you to check out as well. The Mark Hoke Show has been on forever in Vegas. It's all the news, entertainment, and local doings from the Squared Circle from the Vegas area. It's live on Sundays at 8 o'clock on KAWN 1.105 FM. You can subscribe to that podcast and listen live every week on the Odyssey app as well. That's the Mark Hoke Show, worth checking out. If you're into college or traditional wrestling, USA Takedown with host Mark Casper, co-host Jeff Murphy and Caleb Nemmers. It's at 1460 AM on KXNO from Des Moines, Iowa, and 106.3 FM, and on the iHeartRadio app. The apps are great for getting stuff like that. The time of the actual live show, Saturday mornings from 8 to 10 a.m. Central Time. Then here's something a little more modern sounding. It's the Pain Clinic. The Pain Clinic Pro Wrestling Talk Show airs on Sports 1280 WHTK in Rochester, New York. The show was created by, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Sam Fontauzo and Rich Jones, and debuted on November 14th, 1998 with Dr. Love, the Cashman Richie Rich, and Mad Dog Bobby Rogers as the hosts. Listen every week as they covered the major news and interviews and who's who in the world of wrestling. The show can be heard, of course, online at WHTK.com and the mobile iHeartRadio app. Archives of old broadcasts can be heard on iTunes. So that's they're doing a heck of a job. They've been around a long time. And then there's Pro Wrestling Talk STL, which stands for St. Louis, of course. Joe Roderick and John Marisik discuss the latest in the world of pro wrestling Saturdays at 10 in the morning on 590 The Fan. For those out of town, the show can be listened to on the 590 The Fan app, which you can download. One more thing I want to mention. Even though it's not a radio show, it sounds like one. And that's the greatest compliment I can give it. This sounds like a Major League Network wrestling news show. You know why? It's the Wrestling News, produced by the Arcadian Vanguard Network, a network that hasn't put out 1 second of amateur programming the whole time it's been on the air. Another fantastic job. The meat and potatoes news every stinking day. You can't beat it with a stick. It's called the Wrestling News. You all know who's behind this. Brian Last and his entire team. It's absolutely fantastic. I don't miss it any day of the week. If you haven't heard it, it's worth your short amount of time to tune into the podcast called The Wrestling News. I mean, how can you lose? It's the news. It's all the wrestling news. Meat and potatoes, facts and figures, exactly the way grown-ups like it. I don't miss it. You shouldn't either. All right, I'm just about blowing my way through this show at home. I can't believe I'm getting this far. Okay. Our theme song is called Hold On a Sec, and it's performed by the guitarist extraordinaire, Brian Teo. Brian, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Facebook, Bob Smith, you can see me performing with BB King. Write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com for anything you want. You want to be on the show, run it by me. Maybe we can work something out. It goes for a certain wrestler who's been trying to contact me, and we keep getting crossed up. Write to me there if you can't find me anywhere else. I've heard news about this, so just fellow, write to me if you'd like to. Also, our website where you can hear every single one of our shows, outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com, where you can also be part of the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club. For a nominal couple of bucks, you can help support the show, win a couple of prizes. I'm proud to say we had our first Zoom-style meeting recently. I gave away a couple of prizes, which made me feel really good. And it was great to hear from a couple of y'all. And we hope to continue this every month to 6 weeks. We'll do another Zoom-style meeting. You can talk. We'll try to have guests on the show. I won't even announce who the guests are. There'll be a surprise. You'll get to log into the same studio that we use to do our interviews. So I really hope that you will take part in the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club. It's like the show, only you get to be in it. I mean, come on now. Anyway, I think that's it for right now. I can't think of anything else to say. Turn on your radio, hear the wrestling, turn on your TV, see the wrestling, turn on YouTube, watch the wrestling. Don't skip out on that old school wrestling. I hear a bunch of noise seeping through my neighborhood, so I better get the heck out of here. My name is Bob Smith. This is Outdated Wrestling Hour. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.